This is a 1903/1904 Mitchell, made in 1903, probably a 1904 Mitchell model year. It's the oldest Mitchell in the world. Wheels in this car are metal. That's extremely rare because all wood wheels are made out of wood. But these are hand formed at a nickel vanadium sheet metal, and they're totally square and totally round. I mean, they are very true. The engine is a 2-cylinder upright motor with a camshaft. So those are cam operated valves, which is uncommon for 1903 because a lot of the valves for 1903 were poppet valves. So the suction from the intake, the suction from the piston would make the valves open and close, not a cam. So it was cam driven, which is pretty amazing. It's a vertical upright in the front. Most of the engines in 1903 were single cylinders and they were mounted underneath the car. This one is mounted in front. It's also air cooled, which is pretty unusual for back then. But the neatest thing about it is it's got a Roots blower, one of the first Roots blowers in the world. The blower is a Keystone blower, patented 1882. And what that blower was for a blacksmith to make his coal hot so he could pound raw metal. And Roots made the plenum that pushes the air onto the cylinders, that's the Roots blower. Now, Roots blower today would usually refer to a supercharger, which would blow the air into the intake manifold. This one used it to cool the engine. The transmission, it's actually a case that's enclosed. It's full of transmission grease, but there's no bearings in it, roller bearings and ball bearings like a modern transmission has. It's got bushing material for bearings. So these are greasers for the different bearings in the transmission, as well as it's full of grease that is thrown inside of it. The chain is a nickel chain, which is similar to what they had on motorcycles back in 1903. Mitchell did make motorcycles, so this was basically a giant motorcycle. The clutch is conventional. It's a cone clutch, well, sort of conventional. It's a leather-faced cone clutch. So as you actuate it, it completely disconnects from the motor. The frame is basically angle iron, as they made lots of the early cars. This is the serial number of the car, and that serial number of the car is the same thing as the serial number on the transmission and the serial number on the motor. So it's number 120 for the motor, frame, and transmission. So that's nice to have a car that has always been together the whole time. This car, I've taken it apart basically down to nothing, and I found very, very, very few parts worn. I found a few parts broken, but almost nothing worn. So either it didn't have much use or it was extremely well designed. They made about 30 of the Mitchells. It's basically had one family ownership, and I met with at least 6 members of the Mitchell family and the Lewis family when I purchased this. And they both wished me well and knew I'd do a pretty good job restoring it back to being original again, and it's back to being original again. This was their very first version of a car. They had been making motorcycles for 2 years, and the motorcycle basically was a single cylinder like one of these two with a direct drive, and that was their air-cooled motorcycle, and they were very successful with that. Motorcycles, they ended up making them only for 2 or 3 years, and then they thought that the order of things were going to be to cars. So then they started into cars, and then they made cars from 1903. 1904 was the first year they actually sold them. This one was made in late 1903 as sort of a demonstrator. And they made them up to 1923, and they made 23,000 cars over that 20-year period. Successful company. They were an average price car of each day, and the average price certainly changed with the technologies. The first few years, until about 1909, they were all handmade. This one was extremely handmade, and this car was made for Helen Lewis. The company itself was called Mitchell Lewis Wagon Company, And Helen Lewis was the owner's wife. And at this time, women never drove cars. Women hardly even rode in cars. They were an experimental thing. If you could make a car and that a woman could start it and drive it, you could really pave the road for your selling of your cars, because it looked like it might be a genuine article that you might want to buy. If it was that easy to use, well, you should consider it. It has buggy springs all the way around, tremendous amount of travel. It can really take bumps really, really well. It steers pretty easily because it's a lightweight car. The transmission is a 3-speed on the outside. Even though they didn't have windshields at the time, they didn't have tops at the time, they varied the amount of cooling and the amount of wind on the driver and navigator by varying the angles of these hoods. So this could come up a foot, could be scooped in, could be scooped down. They really use this type of hood a lot. All the fenders are wood, and they're original. The seats are completely wood. The tail light is a kerosene light. It shines upon the plate. The plate, they didn't have commercial plates back then available from the motor vehicle in each state. So a person would go to a hardware store and get his own letters on leather and then create his own plate. And then this one is legal in the state of Arizona, and this is registered 1904X, and that's what the car is, its date also. The Mitchell Family Museum, at least the one in Michigan, closed down a year ago, and then the Lewis family was going to purchase it and put it in their museum, but they had said that I had done a good enough job promoting the Mitchell name, because we'd won the Great American Race in 1987 with a 1916 Mitchell. I restored a 1905/1906 Mitchell a couple years ago that we returned it back to the family to let them ride in it, and that got some notoriety. So they figured that I was a pretty good Mitchell guy, and I was wanting to restore it back to what it was, and that we would promote it and drive it and rally it. So they thought, well, as long as I paid the going rate, I would be able to have it. So I did that. And then, and I've still contacted the Mitchell family and the Lewis family since I got the restoration done, and they're both happy with what I've done. And that's nice too.